Hey folks, it's Phelan McPhalen. Happy Monday. It's a beautiful day here in Dallas, finally cooling down some. I've been away for a few days. I've been on some other channels. I've got a couple handles that I use, so that's probably going to be the trend for the next few weeks. I'll probably be on and off this channel, so if you don't see me for a while, that's where I am. I'll be elsewhere on YouTube land. So I was thinking what to do this morning, and it occurred to me, and I've been thinking of these things for the last few days, the whole issue between historicity and constitutionality. You know, where do you draw the line between historicity and constitutionality? Where do you draw that? Where do you put up that boundary mark? Where do you make that division where you say, okay, this is a constitutional doctrine that pertains to the one body. This can't be historicized away. You can't touch that. Can't relegate it to AD 70. Something that hasn't really been done by scholars. As far as I know, there's been no clear boundary between historicity and constitutionality, and it's kind of like a gray area, which is a no man's land. It's kind of like everybody just runs rampant with private interpretation, but nobody puts up any fences. So you've got some people that say, well, you know, the sheep and goats judgment happened in AD 70, there was a resurrection in AD 70, and now, you know, we're not the bride, we're the children of the bride. You've got those arguments, and then you've got someone else that says, no, you know, the coming in clouds of Matthew chapter 24 was fulfilled in AD 70. The sheep and goats judgment wasn't. That's future. So you see what I'm saying? There's a gray area, there's a no man's land, as it were, between historicity and constitutionality. But that's just part of what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to just ask the question, put it out there, throw it out there. Is hyper-preterism a sustainable theology? Is it a sustainable theology? My answer to that is going to be no. It's not a sustainable theology, and partly because it relies on proofs outside of the scriptures. So if you're going to, say you leave somebody with a Bible on a desert island, they don't know anything about Christianity, but you just give them a Bible. Would they be able to, with due diligence and due application, would they be able to arrive at all the truths necessary to not only be saved, but also to grow in grace and in the knowledge of Jesus Christ and his doctrine? My answer is yes. Of course, the hyper-preterist view, they would probably also say yes, but in reality, we know practically it's not going to work out that way because they don't have Josephus. They don't have that knowledge. They may not have that knowledge of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. All they have is the language. So at some level, hyper-preterism changes, modifies, and compromises a person's understanding of the meaning and intent of language. And that is one of the biggest hurdles to overcome when somebody leaves hyper-preterism. That's why I always recommend detox, because their understanding of the meaning and function of language has been compromised by the hyper-preterist scheme. So if you give them a text, first thing they're going to do is try to relegate it to a search, to AD 70. 9 times out of 10. So, and another thing that hyper-preterism does is it creates that loop of circular reasoning where somebody's going to say, okay, well, Christ came back in AD 70 because it says soon, it says near at hand. Then you ask them, well, how do you know that all the New Testament was written before AD 70? You say, well, we know that because that's when Christ came back. So you have that circular reasoning, that loop that you've got to break through. And that's another difficulty in dealing with hyper-preterists and getting people to leave hyper-preterism. You've got to break through that loop of circular reasoning, and that's extremely hard to do. That's probably the most difficult thing that I've ever had to do, because you're trying to throw evidence at them and have them actually look at the evidence, whereas in the great majority of cases, that evidence is, whatever you give them is just going to bounce right off because they're caught in that loop of circular reasoning. If they talk about history and say, well, this is what happened in AD 66 to AD 70, Jerusalem was besieged and, the temple was destroyed and all this and that, and then you try to give them, well, what about 135 AD? What about the Bar Kokhba rebellion? What about all of that? And they'll say, well, that's irrelevant. So you see what I'm saying? So they pick and choose what they want just to keep that cycle going, that loop of circular reasoning. And also because their understanding of the meaning and intent of language has been compromised. I had one guy tell me just recently that, the apostles in Acts 1, when Christ ascended into heaven, the apostles did not actually see him ascend. They were looking they were looking into heaven, but they weren't looking at Christ. They didn't see him ascend. They didn't see him physically ascend. And that's what I mean by compromise. The function and intent and very meaning of language is words no longer have any meaning. See no longer means see. Every eye no longer means every eye. And I understand there's some people that say, if you're a Calvinist, you say, well, all men doesn't mean, that means men from every different tribe and nation, etc. I understand there's modified usages of terms, but those can always be brought out by the text. When somebody says, that they will see him come, that means that it becomes part of their cognitive experience, whether you take see in a literal sense or whether you take it in a more figurative sense. But with a hyper-preterist, the whole meaning of language has been thrown galley west. It's been fundamentally compromised. So when you're trying to convince somebody to leave full preterism, you've got to detox them first so that they can get that perspective back. So they stop looking at things with a magnifying glass, stop looking at the little details that they want to look at, and get them to just step back and to try to get that perspective, which is why you need like a few months of just not even touching the Bible. And I said that before. And hyperpreterism is a sustainable theology. It's only sustainable within its own narrow bounds. So it sustains itself by means of that circular reasoning. It sustains itself by means of that sort of breakdown of communication, of revelatory language, where words can just mean whatever the interpreter wants it to mean. It sustains itself through those means and through those modes, but it's not in itself a sustainable theology. If you read the Bible from front to back without knowing anything about Christianity, you'd never become a full preterist. So they're using more of a two-step approach where a futurist or someone who just approaches the Bible with a normative understanding, they're going to use more of a one-step approach. They're going to say, okay, well, it says, he's coming soon. The world hasn't seen him return yet. It says that he's still sitting at the right hand of the Father. Therefore, his coming is still future. Therefore, that's what we're still looking for. Whereas the hyperpreterist is going to take more of a two-step approach. What they're going to do is they're going to infer from statements like soon in this generation, and they're going to infer that he already did return, and then they're going to, in order to get the doctrine that is for the church today, they've got to make a deduction based on that inference. So it's more of a two-step approach. And the more steps you have, mind you, the more prone you're going to be to error. But it doesn't really matter in the final analysis because it's not a sustainable doctrine. And we can talk about this more as we move along, but I'm going to leave it at that. I've got some things to do this morning. So thanks again for everybody dropping in. Thanks again for your thoughts, your comments, your observations. Have a great day. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.